get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker, you're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. Rhythm in our love, it's impressive, excessive. You can't make this stuff up. My chest beats, it's restless, wakes the neighbors up above. Yeah, baby, come and show me love. Baby, come and show me love, because you're gonna be a heartbreaker, you're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Take a one-way ride, steal us away to find a place we can hide. It wouldn't take much to spear for a night, just to give into the need and leave it all behind.
'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. 'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. You're gonna be a heartbreaker, you're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. You're gonna be a heartbreaker, you're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. Suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Good morning, Wednesday, June 10th. Thanks for watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris, and you guys can follow me on Twitter if you don't already, at Peoples_Pundit. It's right there. We're back after 2 days of storms taking us out, right? So it interrupted our conversation on cognitive biases, including social bias and social desirability bias. And it's all over the news right now, all over the news. And we're going to talk about what they are. But before we do, we live in an era of lies, deception, and as the show, 2 weeks ago said, there is no profession, none, where the ethics haven't been corrupted by partisanship and ideology. Science and data are corrupted. Almost no profession where you can say it isn't. So let's read a list real quick. And this list is going to grow. Because we live in an era of corruption, and because we live in an era of people putting their own personal interests and ideology above their own professional welfare, I'm going to make it a habit of reading a list of names of people that I hear who have the courage to tell the truth. And every day I'll repeat them because the list will grow. But because we're talking about race in America, and because there's one scam after another being sold as a truth to the American people, some of it's having an impact because of social bias, cognitive biases, and some of it's not. But because it is, we need to state these people. We need to recognize these people. We have to reward these people because there's just too much cowardice, and cowardice is rewarded. It can't be. Coward from corporations to the halls of Congress. Our leaders and the powerful are selfish, dishonest, unethical pieces of trash. So let's read a few. Peter Kirsanow. I tweeted about this the other day. This is what gave me the idea. Peter Kirsanow, United States Commission on Civil Rights. Telling it like it is, Peter. Keep it up. Shelby Steele, senior fellow at Stanford University Hoover Institute. Robert Woodson, author and former campaign advisor to President George W. Bush. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but Leo Terrell, civil rights attorney. Send him to me if you got more and you think we need to add to this list. These are all black men, not all who agree with each other, that's for sure, who are telling the truth in the face of enormous social pressure to cower and tell lies. Who's going to reward them? Right now we have the big media hate machine, which we're going to talk about more today. I talk about this on Twitter a lot. There is no force in this country that has done more to divide this country than corporate American media. U.S. corporate big media, which we dub over here the big media hate machine. And we've been dubbing it that for a while. Normally we just bat it back and forth together. But I started to tweet it the other day. Hashtag that puppy. Anytime you see the media telling a lie that will lead to unrest, division, telling a lie, a narrative, pushing a narrative, somebody on a segment, just tag it. Hashtag big media hate machine. Nobody, no one, and nothing, no organization, no person, certainly not Donald Trump. This was long predates Donald Trump. Long predates Donald Trump. They have been dividing the American people on racial lines, on class lines, long before Donald Trump ever came on the scene. Nobody, nothing, no entity has done more to divide the American people and sow discord, sow hate than the big media hate machine. And we're going to talk, let's pick up where we left off. A lot of clips to play because we have a lot of ground to make up. Okay, we were talking right before this storm came, another band came and took us out, which fried everything, and that's why we couldn't do yesterday. Had to get it replaced. Right before it did, we were talking about Colin Powell and this effort. It's not it was not an accident. The New York Times printed that about other Republicans. I really don't want to make this about Donald Trump today because that's not what this is about. This is not black versus white. They want it to be. They want it to be black versus white. It's really an us versus them. But they need it to be black versus white. They need it to be police versus black communities. And if you're with the police, then you're just some white privileged idiot who doesn't understand because you don't support defunding the police departments and hurting those very communities the most that seek to get rid of these police departments. They need it to be that because they cannot explain their own track records. Take a Mitt Romney, for instance. Look at that fraud. Look at that. You think he gives a damn about the people marching for Black Lives Matter? No. Mitt Romney's just trying to avoid having to explain the economic crimes he's committed against the downtrodden. From black to white, it doesn't matter. From the white Ohio man who did a commercial for Barack Obama in 2012 explaining how the Bain Capital takeover took away his wife's health insurance while she needed it the most and she died of cancer. These people don't care about these protesters, and they'll feed them one lie after the other. You know what? I'm going to skip over the Colin Powell thing. And I'm going to go right into some of these new clips. If I have to circle back, I will. By the way, do not miss the 11 o'clock hour. All right. I got a surprise for you. Do not miss the 11 o'clock hour. All right. If you got something to do, pop back in, set your watches for it. Okay. Anyway, I just wanted to tease that out there. This is courtesy of Lisa, which I should call her from now on. She takes photography for PBD sometimes. She took this because she was just out and about and she would, obviously didn't have her camera handy, but, everyone's a cameraman in this day and age, right? If you got your cell phone handy, you got it. And before I play this, reading those names in the beginning, I did for a reason. It is impossible for us to debate each other if we cannot agree on basic facts, basic principles. We discuss what makes a nation and what holds a nation together. Forget about that. Even in the news cycle, if we can't agree on basic facts, then we're in trouble. I don't know how you argue, or forget about placating to Black Lives Matter, BLM. Forget about placating them and the fringe left that are using them. The Black community is being used right now. They don't give a damn about race or the plight of the Black people. This is about power. They are using them to push their agenda. And it's impossible for us to discuss these issues. I personally have told you guys, there, of course, is profiling in this country. Of course there is. And guess what? There's always going to be. But there is no genocide of Black men in this country, police genocide. It does not exist. The numbers don't bear it out. No, we can't discuss an issue if we can't agree on basic facts. Black Lives Matter is built on a foundation of lies. The hashtag first showed up in 2013 when the Trayvon Martin case became a national story. George Zimmerman is an idiot, but the verdict was the right verdict. He had a right to defend himself. By the way, in that case, they were using race to come after the Second Amendment. That's all that was about. Stand your ground laws. In states like me, people like me flee to because we're not free in the Northern Territory anymore. George Zimmerman, whatever you may think about him, had a right to defend himself. He was getting the crap kicked out of him. But they organized their first protest in 2014 when the Michael Brown case became a national story. And the big media hate machine pushed the Black Lives Matter narrative like it was gospel, verbatim. And to this day, despite a Black president and a Black attorney general's Justice Department releasing the report, proving it was a lie, or not proving because it's just their damn opinion, but signing on to the grand jury version of events. Michael Brown never put his hands up. Michael Brown never said, don't shoot. He did, however, viciously assault a police officer and attempt to take his firearm, probably to use it on him. At which point, no matter what color you are, you will be shot for in this country. Rest assured. I'm white as can be. If I go right now to a police officer who was always hanging out in the parking lot in the strip mall next to my office, next to the studio here, and I attempt to remove a firearm off a police officer and viciously attack him, delivering blow after blow after blow to the side of his head, the first chance he gets, he's going to shoot me. Yet, there's still people who believe this lie. Michael Brown never put his hands up. Michael Brown never said, don't shoot. That is a lie, a fiction, a fabrication. And the media regurgitated it. The big media hate machine regurgitated it. And it led to rioting in Ferguson. It led to their own community being burned down and took a whole lot of other people with them. In October of 2017, the FBI released a report. It was first obtained by Foreign Policy. And the FBI report concluded that it was, quote, very likely the false narrative started by black identity extremists in Ferguson spurred an increase in cop killings. Now, there were actually lawmakers who took offense to the term the FBI used, black identity extremists. They didn't take offense to the dead cops. They took offense to that term. This is what the report said. The FBI assesses it is very likely a black identity extremist perceptions of police brutality against African Americans spurred an increase in premeditated retaliatory lethal violence against law enforcement and will very likely serve as justification for such violence. The FBI assesses it is very likely this increase began following the 9th of August 2014 shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and the subsequent grand jury November 2014 declination to indict the police officers involved. Darren Wilson was not indicted because it never happened. Hands up, don't shoot did not happen. A 12-person grand jury in Ferguson, which was comprised of 9 whites and 3 blacks, decided not to indict Officer Darren Wilson for the shooting. By the way, again, African-American grand jury panelists signed on to the law enforcement version of events because there's only one version. Michael Brown's friend was lying. He is a liar, a known liar. Yet Officer Wilson's life was destroyed. Darren Wilson will never have a career in law enforcement again. There are many cases like this over the years. Because in truth, the statistics in this country were headed in the right direction. Since we first brought this up the other day on the show, the instances of black unarmed men being shot by police for the last year in the Washington Post database was 9, down from 30 and change the previous year, which is also a very small percentage of overall interactions. Since then, which Tucker Carlson later did that day, has a much bigger audience than me, so I'm glad. I don't care if good. Since that day, they've been feverishly trying to fudge their own database. One of them is a guy trying to run down a cop with a car. The cop shot him. That for the Washington Post is a cop shooting an unarmed black man. Again, no profession, no area, no profession, social sciences, medical sciences, data sciences, economics, political science. There's no such thing. There is no discipline that has not been perverted by ideology. Science and data. It just doesn't mean anything anymore. You have to go through yourself and you have to check their work. Check mine. I encourage you, check my work. Because you can't believe it anymore. You can't believe anybody. It's all a lie. And these people have fun doing this crap. The media just sold you that narrative, sold millions of black Americans the narrative in Ferguson, and it's never let go. It has never been let go. That video was taken last week, late last week during the protest. Hands up, don't shoot. How can we discuss issues? How can we find common ground if we're going to bring lies to the table of discussion, to the debate stage? You cannot argue with somebody who believes a lie. I can shout till the cows come home at the top of the rooftops, till my voice goes hoarse. There is no data to support this narrative that there is a genocide being carried out by police officers in our country against black men. And then those, if you didn't realize that they lie to you, just flat out lie to you most of it. Some of them believe it because they're stupid and their worldview. I'm talking about politicians and leaders. Some of them believe it because their worldview is just so tarnished. Others are more cynical. They know they're full of crap, and then others just turn a blind eye to it. They are part of that hierarchy that we discussed last week, where you really have the elites at the top. Mostly liberal elites, but we can't toss this all on one group of people. Look at Mitt Romney. Look at Mitch McConnell, who delivered talking points yesterday that could have come from Nancy Pelosi's office. So we can't just heap this on one party. This is kind of a long clip. I will cut it out after the majority of the arguing stops. But this is what they say when they don't hear you. When they don't think you're listening. I mean, sorry, I'm getting buzzed by it's distracting. This is what they say. Give me a couple of minutes to watch this. I know it's tedious, but I want you to hear it.
Thank you, Alderman Cardenas. We'll go to Alderman Lopez and Taylor Farrell and Thompson. Alderman Lopez.
Thank you. You know, before we started this, we're having a conversation about what's going on in our neighborhoods, and it's heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching. But this is what I was trying to get at this morning, is that when downtown is in lockdown, our neighborhoods are next. And our failure to fully get ready for what's going on in the neighborhoods, we're seeing this destruction, and we're thinking that it's going to somehow end tonight. We have seen where in other cities this has gone on for days. And we need to come up with a better plan for days, at least for the next 5 days, to try and stabilize our communities. Right now, Mayor Back of the Yards in Brighton Park, from Halstead almost all the way through to Kedzie, along 47th Street, has been a virtual war zone. Ashland Avenue, which borders between me and Alderman Taylor, has had 400 people and 4 lanes of traffic almost for an hour. And we can't expect our police, and I don't fault them at all, to be able to control this. But I know that we asked our faith base yesterday to stand at the front line between police and looters and rioters. And I am simply not comfortable telling my churches, those people, to be the intermediary in the middle of a riot that's citywide. We need something better, because right now we only have 370 whatever National Guards on standby. Half our neighborhoods are already obliterated. It's too late. We have to come up with a better plan, because my fear is once they're done looting and rioting and whatever's going to happen tonight, God help us, what happens when they start going after residents, going into the neighborhoods? Once they start trying to break down people's doors so they think they got something, we know that people are here to antagonize and incite, and you've got them all pumped today, they're not going to go to bed at 8 o'clock. They're going to turn their focus in the neighborhood. I've got gangbangers with AK-47s walking around right now, just waiting to settle some scores. What are we going to do, and what do we tell our residents other than good faith people stand up? It's not going to be enough.
Thank you, Alderman. Next question.
Well, no, I want an answer. You commented on everybody. I want an answer. It's not something you ignore. This is a question that I have.
I think you're 100% full of shit, is what I think. If you think
no offense, well, fuck you then.
Hold on.
Who are you to tell me I'm full of shit?
And if you think we were not ready and we stood by and let the neighborhood go up, there's nothing intelligent that I can say to you.
Well, maybe you should come out and see what's going on.
It's the stupidest thing I have ever heard. I understand you want to preen. I understand that you think that you...
Mayor, you need to check your fucking attitude. That's what you need to do.
Every single person
right now, no, you need to check your attitude. Wait a minute. I'm being disrespectful. You just told me I'm full of shit.
Hey.
No, you cannot tell me I'm full of shit.
Man. Hey. Everybody, come on, let's calm down. Come on now, let's calm down.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
Ray, cut it up, please. Calm down, please. Come on.
Wait a minute.
Calm down.
My neighborhood.
More intelligent than that. Please calm down.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Right now, we need solutions. So people need solutions. Let's step up, right?
Yeah.
All hands on deck right now.
Right.
Bullshit.
Okay, we will move on, but we recognize certainly the devastation in your neighborhood, and it is not being taken lightly at all.
Apparently not.
Alderman Kelly Farrell.
My question is, I'm sorry, Sam, I should have lowered my...
And that's it. And then they move on. You know, it's not being taken lightly at all. And we're moving on. Well, apparently it was being taken lightly. Apparently it was. This is what happens when they don't think you're listening. They're clueless. Absolutely clueless. I mean, this is supposed to be, by the way, this woman is supposed to be a rock star. And notice how everybody rushed to defend her, circle the wagons around her. Yes, they have, by the way, I got to tell you, it is worth telling you, they have a history together. But this is what happens when somebody tries to voice concerns before it hits the fan. Before a situation like we saw these last few weeks and what happened in Ferguson happens. And we're thinking a lot now about the violence that is going on. This is just a few headlines. I just put in the search bar Ferguson on PPD. And this is not our wheelhouse of coverage of stuff, but slain cops in abnormal numbers becomes news on a data journalism website. It's not like we cover crime and justice. We don't, that's not our beat. That's not what we do. But this is just a few of them. Just a few of them. All right. And by the way, on August 14th, after all of this, Al Sharpton refused to apologize for his role in inciting that violence. The Al Sharpton, who George Floyd's family invited to the memorial service. If we're trying to unite, if everybody was in, on the same ship here, all the ships were sailing in the same directions on George Floyd, why in hell would you invite someone like Al Sharpton? On November 24th, Chicago police on mandatory standby as protesters behind Ferguson, Baltimore pour into the Windy City. That was in Chicago. At that time, it was wrong. Okay. August 10th, man in critical, unstable condition after firing on police in Ferguson on the anniversary of Michael Brown's shooting. March 12th, 2 officers shot right outside Ferguson Police Department. December 22nd, Ferguson protesters chant, "Pigs in a blanket, fry 'em up." After the 2 New York City police officers, Lou and God help me, I know it was a Hispanic name. God help me for forgetting. I can't remember everything. And the list actually goes on and on. Even with people like Charles Barkley trying to stand up and say something about it. Like, look, this is not representative of the police. Now, in this day and age, there is nobody with the courage to do that at all. Why? Because of what is the topic of the show. Cognitive biases, specifically social biases, and the big media hate machine. And Hollywood plays a role in all this, but that's young and impressionable people are different. But as far as our politics goes, the big media hate machine plays the role of an opposition, and they push these lies on society, and it results in real destruction. It results in real death counts. And when we come back in a hot minute, we will talk about what those biases are and how we define them. All right. It is just about, if I waited 8 seconds, it would be 10:30 on June 10th, and you are watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris, and you guys can follow me on Twitter right there, if you don't already, at Peoples_Pundit. Don't forget to subscribe to the page on YouTube, folks. We're We're having a great run. Really love you guys for it. And like the page People's Pundit Daily on Facebook. We're making a rally out of it, right? If you want to support the show, the best way to do so, of course, is to subscribe to People's Pundit Daily, which you can do by going to ppdnews.us/subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. Or you could just go to peoplespunditdaily.com, the best data journalism news site on the internet. Get some data for your dollar. All right, I wanted to do it quick because we just have too much to get through. Right before we blacked out, right before the band from the storm took me out on Monday, 20 minutes into the show, which was going to be such a good show, we're just about to explain social bias and social, because I get asked these questions about polling all the time. And I was talking about, I think, Trafalgar asking the question in 2016 about, who do you think your neighbor is going to vote for? And I'm going to tell you why I don't totally subscribe to that being an answer to why some were right and some were wrong. All right. But these are all what really are called cognitive biases. All right. And a cognitive bias is a deviation in critical judgment that arises because of a situation in a situational manner. And rather than try to get into the weeds and explain that, I'm going to explain a few of them and it'll all become a little bit clear. And then, by the way, when it does become clear to you, you will not be able to watch the big media hate machine on cable news, on network news. You won't be able to read it in the New York Slimes or the Washington Compost, like I've heard it called. That's a good one. I like that one. You won't be able to. It'll pop out everywhere at you. It'll always jump out. The Colin Powell interview with Jake Tapper, which just conveniently comes during the same New York Times article, which, by the way, George W. Bush disputed, that was all meant to show that Donald Trump, that they were all not going to, prominent Republicans can't support Donald Trump. That is an attempt at social bias. Sometimes we do it we have a social bias, when it impacts us, sometimes we don't even know it. Sometimes we do. So it's unwitting and deliberate, or deliberate. And it's when you give preference to, or alternatively to look negatively upon certain individuals, groups, races, and political parties. All right. Groups is the key word there. And we could look at too, I want, if we have time, I really want to pull it up. It works on certain people more than others. Certain people are more tolerant to views than others. Social pressures. It's, I think, like peer pressure. Try to explain this. But when you go to college, when you go away to academia and you go to get an education, when you work in the media industry, when you work in Hollywood, these people have deep social biases and they're now built into their systems. Right? Look at, what's his name? That conservative actor everybody loves. James Woods. Can't get a job in Hollywood anymore. He did not buckle to social pressure. Okay? How does this work in polling? All right. It used to be that sometimes whites would not say, years and years ago, this is a lot of the study and the study data on this goes back a while, because it used to be whites wouldn't want to tell the truth about whether or not they would support a black candidate for whatever, very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Seminal example, I guess, or key example was in Virginia, governor's race in Virginia many years ago. But in polling, just get the definition up. A deviation in critical judgment. Oh, no, that's the wrong one. My fault. All right. The tendency to over-report socially desirable characteristics or behaviors in oneself and under-report socially undesirable characteristics or behaviors, which is also known as a courtesy bias, okay? Which is the tendency to give an opinion that is more socially correct than one's true opinion, so as to avoid offending anybody. All right. In survey research specifically, social desirability bias refers to the tendency of research subjects, meaning the respondent of the survey, to give socially desirable responses instead of choosing responses that are reflective of their true feelings. So, do you support Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton? Or do you support now Donald Trump or Joe Biden? Well, you are told constantly that Donald Trump is a racist. He is a divider in chief. His positions are bigoted, are discriminatory. So while you may agree with some of them, you will tell people that you either aren't going to vote for him or do not support his positions. Excuse me, I had to clear my throat. All right. So basically, in a nutshell, and I got somebody you guys probably like calling me. It's unbelievable. But basically, it goes towards approval rating. Whether or not you approve or disapprove of a certain candidate or a president and the job he's doing as president. With Donald Trump, because I don't 100% subscribe to social desirability bias as a reason for why polling has been wrong over the last 2-3 cycles grossly. It's not just that, because it goes back further than that. You can find some pretty egregious errors going back to 2010. A lot of it has to do with survey methods and then the inability of people to get away with the inability of people to get around social desirability bias when they conduct their surveys. And there are ways, and we're going to talk about them. There are ways to get around them. They just don't do it. For institutional reasons, those data collection methods, they cost more money and they want to charge people more money. The media, it's institutional to do live caller, and we'll talk about that in a second. That is the most vulnerable data collection mode to a social desirability bias. But we do know with Trump that it does exist even in some of our own polling, because we'll say, do you approve of Donald Trump? And they'll say no. A good chunk of them will say no. But then when you go down the list of all of these issues, how about his job handling the economy and jobs? Significantly higher. How about the job he's doing on trade? Significantly higher. Do you approve or disapprove of his positions on immigration? Do you favor or oppose the travel ban? Significantly higher. And that is in some part because of desirability biases. So what do we do to get around them? Collect data through methods that do not require the presence or involvement of an interviewer. This is, by the way, you will hear the genius Chris Steyerwalt on Fox News, who still hasn't apologized for his bomb in North Carolina, among other states, in 2016. Or their Joe Donnelly +7 over there in Indiana. Or McCaskill potentially holding on to her seat in Missouri. I mean, they're just going to move on and pretend like that didn't happen. Okay? But you will hear people like him say that the Fox News polling operation is the best in the business because they do the gold standard of data collection. This is not a secret in the real world of survey research, which is not just dominated by politics. Market research can be used for corporations. We've conducted voir dire before for trial attorneys. In the real world of private research, survey research, none of what I'm going to show you is a secret. It's not even controversial. We know these biases exist, and we know ways to get around them. They choose not to get around them. They choose to leave the artifacts of these polls in their polls year after year and cycle after cycle. They are choosing to do that. Over the years, I've just become more cynical. I'm sad to say it hurts me to say it. I used to have great faith in averages. Every poll has sampling errors, which, by the way, are not the same as margin of errors, which apparently needs to be a whole other damn show in and of itself, because I see just before I made a comment on Twitter about it. I love Secrets with Paul Bedard in the Washington Examiner, but he uses these terms incorrectly, like many, 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 many people in the media do. There is no such thing as a margin of error in an opt-in internet panel. It is not a random sample survey. They have sampling errors. Any mixed mode poll. By that, I mean they collected different ways. Maybe they collected through text message, online panel, cell phone, landline. You cannot have a margin of error for that poll. It is a sampling error. And in an all opt-in, in many cases, it's more preferable to give a confidence interval like we did in 2016. They are not the same. I can only imagine. I've become more cynical, like I was saying, because of what I see in their actual news desks, which are not supposed to be editorialized, because of the perversion of hard news, not just in politics, but in financial reporting everywhere. Money news is never supposed to be like that. But over the years, it has become that. I don't know why we would give them any more benefit of the doubt when it comes to their polling now. And I know that is a statement that deviates from what I've been saying for years, but I just don't know what else to say when I see Black Americans being 20% of the electorate in the CNN poll, which I defended them over 2 days. I said, just because they oversampled them, and if you are a show watcher or a Twitter follower, you know the difference. Just because they oversampled them does not mean they are overrepresented in the poll. But after looking, they are overrepresented. There is no reason in June, before a presidential election, to be conducting polls of adults. There's really no reason to be doing it of registered voters anymore. At this point, you should be working on your likely voter model. Because if you're not going to know who the electorate is. I can tell you, rest assured, the electorate will not be 23% Republican. And this comes after defending them. But after getting a chance to go in and actually look at it, they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt. I sucks to say that, because I always tell you guys, don't dismiss the polling. But don't dismiss it. There's always some nugget you can get out of them, even if you don't particularly, you don't think that particular poll was conducted correctly, or you see something that maybe you've learned, picked up here, and you spot something. I still would strongly suggest you don't outright dismiss everything in that poll. But at this point, I'm becoming more and more skeptical that some of this is just not intentional for the purpose of pushing some form of cognitive bias. Because I just showed you one solution, and I'll recap it here before we move on. But nothing I'm showing you is some kind of secret. It's not even disputed. Not in the actual industry. They just refuse to evolve. Tell me, at what point, how many misses before we just say something has got to be intentional? And I will say this, live caller, which is solution one, means take the live caller out of the equation. They are casting judgment on the respondent, and the respondent is not telling the truth. Even if it's a small fraction of the survey that accounts for this, it could throw off everything. It could wreck the results of a survey. A small shift can decimate the results of a survey. And I know I'm about to get yelled at by Madam Producer Laura, but I'm not giving up any trade secrets here, Laura, okay? But I am going to say this, that live caller polling definitely has a social desirability bias risk. And what we do, if people are uncomfortable, is redirect them to an interactive voice response where they are assured that their responses are confidential and they will remain anonymous. Some people, for a story, if it's a media poll or even like we used to do in PPD, we would say, is it okay if we share your comments? And in our online panel, we were allowed to take in text responses, or if the interviewer, if you're conducting a live interview, they can actually type what somebody is saying, the comments you're getting, some feedback. If you're getting an open-ended answer, an answer to an open-ended question, which is what that's called, we would say, is it okay? And then they would end up in a story, but others can be funneled to an anonymous IVR application. And you just stress to them over and over again that their responses are anonymous. They will be kept confidential. And by the way, don't forget to answer the demographic portion of the survey because we cannot collect your responses without it. They choose not to do this. They choose to get live interviewers. And in 2016, I will blur the name out right now, Laura. In 2016, Richard Hart's firm called he polls for NBC News. He called our house, and the live interviewer, who was Hispanic, you could tell from her accent, asked for my wife. It's supposed to be a random survey. And I said, what firm is this? Who are you polling for? Well, we're not allowed to give it. Well, I said first, who are you polling for? And they said they're not allowed to give it out, which is completely understandable. But what research firm is this? Hart Research and Associates, or whatever it's called. They asked for my wife because she's a 30-something-year-old Hispanic female, as opposed to me, who was a 30-something-year-old white male. They wanted to talk to her. And by the way, when she gave answers that she didn't like, she absolutely responded with language that would taint a survey. I was standing right there. Her reaction to Laura's answers were not good. There was an emotional reaction to what Laura said in response. And if Laura's in there right now, I mean, she's producing, but I know she interacts with you guys. She'll tell you I'm telling the truth. There was an emotional, and it was a displeasing attitude. So you could tell she was displeased with the responses that Laura was giving. Some of them were gave the impression she was surprised. That is a no-go. First of all, you don't call and ask specifically for somebody on a voter file. If you are conducting a random sample survey, the person who picks up is the person you got. So you got white me, not Hispanic her. The only question there is, sir, you are registered to vote. That's it. Would you be willing to participate in this survey? Your participation is voluntary, but greatly appreciated. It's an important political survey. Whatever spiel others give, we give it to keep people on the phone. Your response is, your participation in the interview is voluntary, but vital and appreciated. That's what we do. With her, they should never have said, oh, hi, Mr. Barris, your wife there. That's crazy. It's more than crazy. It's unethical, and it's the end of the survey. It's over. All right, so solution 2 here, because we're running up on this. I wanted to blurt it out because, by the way, Richard Hart's polling for NBC and then working for Hillary Clinton. You can't do that. I would never do that. Never. All right, solution 2. Properly identified options to questions vulnerable to social desirability effect is another means of tackling this issue. And by the way, I will put the working paper. I don't think I did. I meant to. I had 2 damn days. I meant to, but I will. I will put the working paper, and you will see how many people in the field contributed where I'm getting some of these solutions from right off the bat. You may even recognize some of them. Because the point is, I mean, I'm not pulling this out of my ear. The point is, this is not like some top secret information. I'm telling you what is known. It's known. Unfortunately, the political aspect to this industry, like meteorology, like public health, and everything else, has been perverted by ideology. All right. So what they're saying here is when you are formulating your questions and your answers, is there a way maybe that you can identify one of the words, the terms, worms? Is there a way that you can identify them and say, you know what, I don't like this. This is subject to social desirability bias. Maybe there's a better format that we can give. Maybe there's a better format. Maybe there's a better option. Is there something else that we can do to make this less subject or less risk for social desirability effect? All right. And then solution 3 is measure the extent of the bias present in responses to a survey by incorporating a socially desirable scale in the survey. And we love this, especially for online, because online has gotten great over the years and we've bugged a lot of companies to do better. We were one of the first to be advocates of online polling. And we pushed them to come up with better stuff. Like, man, it's just a simple JavaScript code. You guys make enough money. Get your IT guys to build us a cool little scale. So when the response, I remember, believe me, I remember I was around like a pioneer in online polling. It was archaic back in the day. And now it's great. You can do a little scale. You can even ask a question where, how comfortable are you answering the following question? And then whatever it may be. And then on a scale, maybe it's a 0 to 10 scale. Maybe you give them a extremely comfortable to not comfortable at all scale. Make it interactive. Let them play with it. And then you can do that on the phone by simply saying, how comfortable are you? On a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being not at all comfortable and 10 being extremely comfortable. How comfortable are you asking this question, answering this question? Again, nothing I'm talking about here is news. Nothing I'm talking about, nothing I just showed you is some kind of experimental idea or, you know, like that's one of their favorites. Oh, that's experimental. That's not the gold standard. They not only did that to me, along with worse, they've called me a lot worse, even a lot worse. But they did it to the Rand Corporation, who the LA Times later took their method, USC LA Times poll. They did much better in 2012 with Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. But the point of that data collection mode, the point of that entire methodology is to show you that big swings are artifacts of the polls themselves. For the most part, there is a very small group of Americans, specifically very small group of voters, who do not swing. They don't. They just don't, folks. They are artifacts of the polls themselves. Maybe Republicans or Democrats, whoever it may be. There is a story in the media that is not a good story, and it's not good for your guy or your girl. You will be less likely to participate in that survey. That is response bias. They don't care to tell you about this. They don't care to explain this to viewers or consumers. And they don't care. And this is the problem. This is the ultimate problem. They don't care when they're wrong. They don't give a damn anymore. You think Quinnipiac hasn't had plenty of time to conduct their own like autopsy on what they did wrong in 2016 and 2018? Between 2016 and 2018. You think they didn't have time to review that before they put out abysmal state polls the next cycle in 2018? Of course they did. They just chose not to. They chose not to do so. Which tells you that maybe some of this is intentional and some of this is really just the result of their own biases. It is, and I've talked to you about this before, it is a different environment for pollsters now and has been for years than it used to be. When you get hired by somebody, they want a certain number. They want a certain result. They want a press release. They want a headline. If it's a campaign, they want something to fundraise off of. And they pressure pollsters at a level now that was never the case years ago. And again, Madam Producer will tell you, it's ridiculous. And I always get insulted because I'm always like, at this point, when people try to do it to me, I'm always like, what the hell have you not paid attention to when it comes to me? Like, what about me and our knowledge together? Your knowledge of me and our time together and our relationship. What on earth would make you think that I would even consider doing that? So it's like, and if you're going to hire somebody to tell you the truth, you have the right guy. If you're going to hire somebody to blow smoke up your butt, you don't. Which, by the way, is why I would tell you guys, let me do this the nice way. When these polls came out the other day, or specifically the CNN poll, Donald Trump got John McLaughlin, who is his pollster, to write a response about what was wrong. Well, maybe at the end of, because we're coming up on the break now. What do I got? A couple of minutes before the break. I don't know if I could squeeze it in, but he basically gave the president an explanation about what is wrong and what is not about the polling that he saw with CNN. And I think maybe we should hit it before the break here. Let me give me a hot minute and I'll pull it up. But he gave the president a response. And I hope the president didn't pay him for that, because I really do. I hope President Trump did not give him any money for that answer, because some of it was worthwhile, worth listening to. Some of it is not. Some of it is a pollster telling a client what they want to hear as opposed to what they need to hear. Okay? All I can do, because we're doing this quick, all I can do is kind of superimpose it. Let's go through it, because I know a ton of you DM'd to me and you wanted my opinion on it. I'll give you some. And then Brad Parscale wrote an op-ed basically touting this and making some points himself, which, again, I think some are noteworthy and some are not. Okay? So he said, and it cut some of it off. That's a damn shame. It just kind of overlaps me and cuts some of it off. But okay, the latest skewed media polls must be intentional. It's clear that NBC, ABC, and CNN, who have Democrat operatives like Chuck Todd, George Stephanopoulos, and other Democrats in their news operations, are consistently underpolling Republicans and therefore reporting biased polls. They continue to poll adults or registered voters that skew away from likely voters. That part is, of course, true, but underpolling is the incorrect word. So instead of the 33% Republican turnout, which actually happened in 2020, they are reporting polls on, which actually happened in 2020. I think he meant 2016. They are reporting polls on only 26%, 25%, or even 24% Republicans. You cannot wait for party ID. That is incorrect, folks. If you wait for party ID, you will get the electorate wrong. If you have a good enough sample and you wait for other demographics that are key demographics, such as race, region, education, income, the party ID, and then you have a good likely voter model. You have to couple that with a good likely voter model. How to determine who will and will not vote. That will tell you the partisan breakdown of the electorate. They will speak to you. If you think, well, in 2016, they were 33% of the electorate, so I'm going to wait for that, you will be wrong. Because I challenge anybody to show me a preceding electorate for a presidential election where it mirrored that current election cycle. So in other words, the partisan affiliation of 1988 was not the same as 1992. The partisan affiliation of 1992 was not the same as the party affiliation of 1996. The 96 electorate, the partisan affiliation, was not the same as it was when Bush v. Gore in 2000, and so on and so forth. Bush v. Kerry, not the same as Bush v. Gore. Okay, let's take a quick hot break, and I'll be back because I just wanted to hit that up the most. That is the important stuff. Forget about John McLaughlin's analysis of the so-called polling that we have. All right, let me take a hot minute, and then when we're back, I got a surprise for you guys. Okay, I didn't want to. I'm going to drop this on you at the last minute. Give me 2 minutes, and we'll return in a hot minute.
How much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker, you're such a love taker, so just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. Rhythm in our love, it's impressive, excessive. You can't make this stuff up. My chest beats, it's restless, wakes the neighbors up above. Yeah, baby, come and show me love. Baby, come and show me love, because you're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
We can get on a plane and take a one-way ride, steal us away to find a place we can hide. It wouldn't take much to spear for a knife, just to give into the need and leave it all behind.
'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. 'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. Suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
All right, we are back, and I had a surprise for you. Here it is. All right, we're joined by a trial lawyer and the best political gambler in America, Robert Barnes, folks. We were supposed to have him on Monday, and then all that happened. So I'm glad he could join us now, because I really wanted to get his take on this. I'll tell you what, Robert, you defended Wesley Snipes in Ocala, Florida. Okay, before we get into the other stuff, I really wanted to bring this up. You defended Wesley Snipes in Ocala, Florida. You did an amazing job for that man under less than favorable circumstances. So I try to tell people all the time, let's not pretend like there isn't some kind of prejudice and bias in America, because there is, and you could attest to that better than anybody. But it doesn't mean we have to believe all of the lies. And on your show, folks, if you haven't seen the show American Countdown at 8 p.m., right? 8 p.m. Check it out, because it's a great show. And the other day he did a show on Black Lives Matter, which we were talking about earlier today. Robert, tell us a little bit about what you meant by it's not a real civil rights group. This is not a civil rights group.
It's basically a poor man's Black Panthers Party. And so it has a lot of the same ideology of it, the same sort of idolatry of it in certain respects. It's not any great civil rights movement in the United States, particularly in the Black community, but also for others, has been rooted in the local religious community, religious tradition in terms of its rhetoric, in terms of its moral narrative, but also just institutionally. Its organized members are organized through the church, members of the church. And what that does, and that provides a lot of benefits. It means you have people that have life experience. It means you have people that are deeply entrenched in the local African American community. It means it's people who know who's who and what's what in the local community. Often are looking for actual change, not just sort of rhetorical slogans or to take down the country. BLM has nothing to do with the Black church. Indeed, they're hostile to both the Nation of Islam community here in the United States and most particularly the strongest institution in the Black church, which is the evangelical Protestant tradition in the Black church. There's a little bit of, particularly from the Caribbean, Latin American, Catholic Black tradition as well, though it's not as strong and dominant. But it's hostile to all three. Indeed, two of its three founders are actually supporters and participants in the Yoruba religious tradition, which is actually it's an actual witchcraft tradition. Is what it is. I mean, it sounds like an Alex Jones thing. BLM is founded by witches, but if you look it up, it's actually true. It's people who believe. So that gives you an idea of how distant they are from that religious tradition. They're also very big into the gay, transgender identity issues. That's just not a big issue, practically speaking, in the Black church. So that there's a lot of reasons why they're hostile to it, but the fact they're not rooted in the Black church was a critical sign that this was not a historically successful kind of civil rights organization. The second aspect in almost every successful civil rights movement, including Malcolm X's movement, who rightly is seen as much more controversial, but he was also much more successful than anybody like BLM or Black Panthers Party were. To a large degree, I mean, he got Lou Alcindor and Muhammad Ali became Muhammad Ali because Malcolm X recruited him to go from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali. So he developed a certain defining image in the public space. But the other aspect is they're all rooted in the Black business community. Both MLK and Malcolm X had deep ties to the local African American community where they organized protests, where they organized meetings, and that provided institutional knowledge. The same kind of knowledge you would get from the religious part of the Black community, you would get from the business part of the Black community. What are the issues, practically speaking? And if you're organizing protests, because local people that had positions of power within the community organized those protests never got out of hand. You never saw a Malcolm X protest. You did hundreds of them across the country, ever end up in any kind of rioting or looting.
Right.
Same with King's protest. And then the third aspect is a successful civil rights organization will be connected to civil rights lawyers, civil rights advocates, policy analysts that have been in the weeds for decades. Black Lives Matter has nothing to do with them either. I mean, it was literally formed by three hardcore lefty activists in the Alinsky sort of, they are Marxists. That's why some people are surprised that there are pictures of the founder of the Black Lives Matter. There were three of them, but the lead one with the Venezuelan President Maduro. That should not come as a surprise at all. To them, the issue of civil rights is not an issue of reform. It's not an issue of restructuring. It's a reason to condemn the United States of America. It's a reason to overthrow the entire infrastructure. That's why they've had almost no practical policy solutions. That's why their website astoundingly manages to have no meaningful data analysis in it. That's why, I sort of personally witnessed this because I have a lot of civil rights cases across the country. I've been doing them for 2 decades. I had several big ones in Milwaukee where I was trying to clean up the Milwaukee County Jail, and especially, but also their mental health facilities in the state of Wisconsin, which are just like something out of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I mean, people would be involuntarily institutionalized to make sure a certain thing didn't happen, and then they would facilitate that very thing happening, some form of self-harm. And so but I couldn't get and so when a case involved an African American, I tried to get BLM involved. BLM had no interest. So that gave you in fact, they were not interested in any uniting cases at all. Their modus operandi was they wanted a divisive case. They wanted a case that would feed negative stereotypes about Black men. So that's why they would choose. That was one of the reasons they would choose bad cases. This is an argument that the author of The Shadow of a Panther wrote about all the way back in the 90s, when he said that what happened was the media celebrated the Black Panthers because it really the white left's your white liberals' interpretation of black men was really rooted in a racist stereotype, just a different kind of racist stereotype, but one of them being almost animalistic, this vicious, sort of the unleashing of their own hidden unconscious passions were projected onto African-American men writ large, so that the gangster image that was celebrated by the celebration of the Black Panthers, he blames that to leading to gangster culture, to a lot of gangster rap, to a lot of black men saying, oh, that's the icon I should live up to. I should be the man with the gun on the street that everybody respects, not a different kind of black male representative. And you see the same thing here, but they do it worse, really. They always lie about the people out of the gate. And it's what causes controversy, whether it's Ahmaud Arbery or, started out with Trayvon Martin. That was the first case that Black Lives Matter showed up on the scene for. And they lied about it. They made him look like a little kid who was in a hoodie out for, getting some Skittles.
Graduation cap. Right?
Exactly. All of the pictures of him like 4 years earlier when he was actually much younger.
Right.
So you see this little child. Obama, of course, came out and said, that could be my son. Well, not unless he keeps getting in trouble for bullying and beating people up at school, but putting that aside. And then he was the one whose head was getting bashed on the ground and then summarily executed, not Zimmerman being small, being a little guy, a Latino guy, who had it, whose head, it was his head getting bashed into the concrete when he defended himself. But they portrayed that entirely differently. Mike Brown was the big case that really catapulted BLM into public fame. They're backed by big media, backed by billionaires, backed by big corporations, all of which should be a strong indicia that this is not a true civil rights organization, that this is a politically divisive tool that the media and the left thought they could use. Now, the problem with your sort of neoliberal Pelosi types is it's hard to, as Sam Adams once said, it's very hard to ride a tiger. But you unleash the tiger of a revolution, chances are he's going to eat you sooner or later. And they're seeing it now with Antifa and BLM. Their ability to control this group is very limited. It's like Robespierre and the mob in the French Revolution.
It comes back at you.
Exactly.
That first element that you were talking about, I view that really big failure of the Republican Party. If you look at the history of civil rights, from abolitionism to women's suffrage, these were all bottom-up movements in the churches, fueled by, they used to call them the holy warriors, they used to call them. And they've been, left out in the dark there, Robert, and there is no one else to talk to. And this is a big, I don't know if you heard it, but Mitch McConnell yesterday, really an embarrassment. So where else would they turn if he's going to try to just echo the rhetoric of the left anyway? Where would they turn? But over the years, they had, just as recent as a few months ago during the COVID crisis, who were they targeting for religious persecution? Who wanted, they were trying to hold services and mass in the parking lot. Those were a lot of black churches in the South, and you heard not a peep. So along comes BLM, and the characteristics completely different. And I said I had to have you on because I remember you a while, and you just said it too. That was going to be my second question. I remember a while ago you told me that it was the MO of these people in the media to push these narratives. They don't really want these cases like George Floyd, where some of us can get behind it, right? They don't want that. They want, what do you think happened here? Ahmaud Arbery didn't work because more footage came out, so it didn't work. Yeah. So they just decided they need something. What happened here, you think?
I think Arbery did fit their sort of divisive narrative because it was a case that, one, they exaggerated Arbery's background and tried to make him, the whole jogging story was always dumb. I mean, it was just right away. I was like, that's probably not true. It doesn't. There's not a lot of young black men who go jogging through white neighborhoods in the South, period. I mean, it's just that's reality one, unless he's a very professional class guy from out of town. And that's small town Georgia. That wasn't big city Georgia. So right away I was like, okay, that's just not a likely explanation. And then as facts developed, it was completely incredulous. And then there were defense arguments for the McMichaels in terms of what took place. Now, subsequent evidence, the state has found evidence of racism by the junior McMichael and the third person, and that's going to make their case tougher. Not the father, who's really responsible for a lot of it, but no question, Arbery fit the divisive dynamic that they want. I try to explain to people, like Scott Adams and some others, who took BLM at face value initially. I was like, they don't want uniting cases because their goal isn't reform.
Right.
There's a reason they don't have policy proposals with any detail, with any realism. I mean, the idea for defund the police didn't surprise me because BLM has been talking about it now for 3 years. It just didn't. The media thought, okay, that's obviously insane, so we won't talk about that being with their policy proposal. Now it just took off in the streets. But they have no interest in uniting cases because uniting cases don't create political power. Uniting cases don't indict the country. Uniting cases aren't a basis for insurrection. Uniting cases don't have any of the don't actually encourage racial divisiveness. Their entire organization is they want divide. They want their side to be really angry and upset, and they want the other side to be angry and upset at them. That's why there's a reason they don't want a case where the guy's got a clean record. They don't want a case where the cop has a bad record. Michael Brown was the most egregious version of this, the biggest mythology of all time. Hands up, don't shoot. The reason why the grand jury wouldn't indict was because the African-American elder man that was a witness to the whole thing said, I would have shot Brown a lot sooner than the cop did.
Right.
And so, in fact, it's the way I describe a lot of people. When people were getting the Michael case, I was like, well, just do a thought experiment, change the race, make Aubrey white, make the guys black. And they do all the same behavior. Do you have a different conclusion? Almost universally, people did that were on the pro-Aubrey side of the equation. And the way you can do that is not make it Aubrey. You just tell them a story. But the way I always used to put it is, what would Shaft have done? The idea that here you have this popular cultural icon going over multiple generations within the African-American community in Shaft, and he shoots people fast. So the idea that that taking the law into your own hands or the rest was implicitly or inherently or necessarily racist just doesn't really conform to the reality. And having done lots of police cases, police abuse is simply non-discriminatory. You got about 5 to 10% of cops that are bad.
That's right.
And the number one people keeping them in power are Democratic prosecutors, Democratic politicians, and Democratic judges.
Look who chose not to prosecute this Chauvin, Derek Chauvin. That was the other reason they could not let this story develop on its own. So one, Floyd was a rare uniting case. There's a rare uniting case for BLM to be involved in because it just took on a life of its own. So when I saw it was a uniting case, I was like, I'm curious how they're going to make this into this. Yeah.
Well, it turns out not that hard. Just do a bunch of riots and looting. Racialized something that didn't have to be racialized, but even taking that at face value, they managed to take probably the most uniting police abuse case since Rodney King, and managed to convert it into one of the more divisive incidents of history because of what happened afterwards. So they needed to do that. But the other reason they needed to do that is you dig into the institutional reforms that are needed to clean out bad police units from good police. And about 85 to 95% of police will never have a problem in their lives, will never create a problem in their lives. But it's like doctors. 5 to 10% of doctors cause 90% of medical malpractice. And what I've complained to the medical profession forever is their failure to police their own leads to that. Yeah. And the same is true of cops. I understand why cops have the mentality they do. They worry about a bogus allegation from a criminal because it's an easy thing for a criminal to do. They worry about things like that. But the reality is that they know there's 5 to 10% that are bad. But the main people that are protecting them are prosecutors, and almost all of them are Democratic prosecutors. Because Democrats want a clean record, a clean sheet. They don't want any case they've ever had to be second guessed or questioned. Klobuchar was notorious for it in Minnesota.
Yep.
But if Floyd was going to expose Democratic politicians as the primary source protecting bad police, as the primary reason for the existence of bad police, well, BLM and the Democratic Party could not afford that either, particularly someone who's considered it was going to be in the cabinet if Biden got elected. So her whole career would be ruined if her name got attached to George Floyd for forever. And it wasn't, it was within a day or two of The Guardian breaking that story about Klobuchar's role in covering up for the lead bad cop. What I would tell people right away, if you want to know whether a cop's bad or not in any case, civil rights case, just look at his record. Yeah. It's like an abusive husband. Like if a wife comes in and says, or a girlfriend or anyone, partner says, hey, he beat me up or did this thing, you can find out pretty quickly whether she's telling the truth or not by just looking at his record. Abusers,
repeat offenders.
Exactly. Abusers they do it for a common psychological cause that unites their behavior. If on the other hand, someone says, hey, he beat me up, and you look into his history and every ex he's ever had says, no, that never happened, that means there's, maybe it's a one-off, but more likely it means that you're not getting a full correct story. Same is true of corrupt cops. They'll have a long history. Because they're basically authoritarian sociopaths who the police can't, it's the reason why the key is prosecutors policing the police. Because the police can't screen out everybody that comes in. They don't get paid well enough to do that. And practically speaking, if you were an abusive sociopath, why wouldn't you want to go be a police officer? It's just the nature of it. That's why I told people, it's not that there's something about being a police that makes people bad. It's that there's going to be a disproportionate number of bad people who want the power of the badge and the moral authority and the legal permission slip to act out their sociopathology. That's where some people were defending Chauvin. I was like, I get there's some defenses out there for him. He may have not caused the death at all because of the drug overdose that was occurring by Floyd. Right. But what people witnessed, I thought probably was Chauvin. And of course, you look it up. The guy had 18 prior serious civil rights complaints against him. Klobuchar, at the time, Klobuchar decided not to prosecute. And she did a smart job of blaming her successor, but she had the file while she was there. So the idea that, that she passed, I didn't actually ultimately decide, my successor made the ultimate decision. Anybody who knows how prosecutors' offices know that's a bunch of nonsense. She sandbagged the case so that it could not be brought. But she did that for all the cops in Minneapolis, many of them corrupt cops, rogue cops, and that's the real key to it. But we were never going to get that story once the rioting and the looting and our little mini Chinese cultural revolution began.
Do you think that comes from there? I mean, maybe now it's not as strong, especially with, the police unions now may be up for grabs, but historically that's not really the case. So right. A lot of people have been talking about, their immunity, even though this really, some people I think misunderstand what that is, and maybe you could elaborate on that, but police unions have had a connection to people in the Democratic Party for years before. I mean, this is where they come. And by the way, it looks like CBS, who sat on the story for days, Robert. Now there was a history here with Chauvin and Floyd. So we didn't hear about that during the riots. That goes to what you were just saying about if there is a history and there is even it's psychological with him, then he returns to the same guy to abuse the same guy. I mean, I've seen that myself. Once a cop has the what on for you, he's got it, and you're you got a problem until you make it right. That happens. That's real. But we didn't get that during that time either. But how much do you think if we were to, I don't want to say get rid of them because I don't think we should, honestly. But how much of the problem is the union defense problem?
My own view has been I'm actually more on the pro-union side of the aisle generally, but in the private sector. I have never liked government unions. To me, it creates an inherent contradiction of interest because you become a government within a government. I just have never liked it. The police union does do a good job of defending its members. So I think the issue goes into police union contracts. So the city and the county and state, I think, hide often behind those contracts, but there's no reason why they cannot require as a condition of those contracts cleaning up the corrupt members within there. They could leverage the union's power for the union to discipline their own, that when they come to the conclusion that somebody's problematic, to get rid of them. And I think that would make a lot of difference over time. But I think so. That's my general view on it. I think it plays a role. It's not but it's a derivative, indirect effect of a choice by politicians to have bad cops on the payroll. And I think there are other reasons too. Bad cops have a historic rate of very high conviction rates. That's the other thing that prosecutors don't want to talk about. Democratic politicians don't want to talk about. Now, I have problems with their high conviction rate because I think they're disproportionately procured by problematic means. Cops like Mark Furman had high success rates. That's why he stayed on. There's a guy who's sued the LAPD saying, by the way, I'm so incorrigibly racist that it's a disease and I should be labeled disabled. And they kept him on the force. So
holy cow. What do you think about the other two that sat around, Robert? I mean, this is, especially if you're a new cop. I mean,
yeah, I think that it's a rough gig to prosecute the two rookies. I think the cop with seniority that was also on the scene, he also had a bad history, and he like harassed random strangers, harassed a pregnant woman. There was complaints against him for that. So basically, you had, and I wonder whether he was partners with Chauvin. I assume he was partners with the rookie. But it wouldn't surprise me if they had worked situations like this before, the two of them, given they had the same demeanor, same disposition. And these two rookies got really unlucky. I didn't see anything from the two rookies that justified the criminal charge against them, or even really necessarily a firing, because they have a difficult guy, and they never sit on him. So I guess, are they supposed to tackle the senior officer at the scene?
Right. That's
to prevent it,
Hosty attitude we're coming back with now, where grab the pitchforks and the torches and just burn everybody. I mean, you must know nothing about how police forces, or I was in the military, that would be akin to like, if I'm a private first class and I saw my sergeant doing something out of line, there's nothing, not a whole lot you can do.
There isn't. Yeah. Well, and I thought it was ironic too, both this and in the context of the rioting and the looting, that there was so much super criticism of the McMichaels for executing citizens arrest, with a lot of people saying citizens arrest are terrible and horrible and awful. Well, that's effectively kind of what they're asking those younger cops to do, because they're asking them to discard their own rules, take the law into their own hands, and execute it against a senior officer, despite the hierarchy that the police department requires. Of course, also citizens arrests have a whole new demeanor in the rioting, looting context. They couldn't have helped the McMichaels more by doing all of that activity. People are like, what could inspire guys to try to chase down someone they think is a thief? Well, exactly. If you live in an environment that you feel is legal chaos, parts of Seattle right now are occupied by Antifa. We have occupied parts of Old City. I was trying to remember, and I don't remember, all of this reminds me so much of the late 1960s. It startles me the degree, Trump has always had a Nixonian kind of component with him.
Sure.
A guy with populist instincts who obsesses over the media. That's basically Nixon. People could
Why don't they like me?
Exactly.
That's Trump.
Pat Buchanan wrote that whole book about inside the Nixon White House a couple of years ago, and it was shocking how it felt like you were reading live time Trump stories, like the whole thing about personnel policy that Buchanan kept telling Nixon, you can't have all these establishment types around you or they'll betray you in time. And of course, that's what has happened to Trump repeatedly.
Sure is.
And so I think the riots saved him. I mean, I think the lockdown put him at real risk. Because his trump card he had taken away from himself effectively. Now, he may not have had much control over it ultimately, but because he went along with the lockdown, it's hard for him to say, hey, these crazy Democratic governors shut down the economy that caused the problem.
Yep.
He went along with it. But I think the riots changed the script tremendously.
That dovetails into, I wanted to ask you about this before you ran out of time here. And really, it gets into what we were even just talking about with the media and Black Lives Matter. We're calling it the big media hate machine. Tag it, use it. Big media hate machine, because we've always used that over here, but it's true. This is what nobody is more divisive. Forget about Donald Trump. Nobody has pushed more hate and division on this country than the corporate media. And so we called them this for a while, and I just started telling people use this because it gets the point out. But now, Robert, with the Black Lives Matter got favorable glowing coverage for weeks and weeks and weeks, even through all the rioting and through the looting. I'm curious to see more, because you never want to base it off of one pollster, but we're talking also about social desirability bias and really cognitive biases in general today. How much of this, if you are a white man now at this point and a pollster calls you on the phone and you hear, maybe I've gotten polled before, and you can tell if it's maybe a Hispanic on the phone or an African-American interviewer. We were talking about different solutions, and for people who don't know, Robert and I have been on this for years. There has got to be better ways to do this. How many people would tell Rasmussen the truth at this point, Robert? I mean, I do not buy social bias as much as others, but at this point, it's real.
Yeah, and I definitely the polling have become more and more distrustful of. One, it's all over the place. So you're also seeing a gap. I mean, today Nate Cohn was arguing that everything's about persuadable voters, not about turnout, and that's a myth. And I was like, well, that's, I thought he would at least cite or address all the literature that when they poll the same group of people over time, there tends to be very little movement.
Absolutely.
And he doesn't even address that at all. And that most of the noise you see in polling tends to reflect non-response bias at key junctures. So when the other side's convention is happening, they're all excited. They're happy to answer the calls, et cetera.
That's right.
And where it tends to show up, there's some that will weight by party, some that will not. But I found that it showed up in 2016 and that they got widely different independent voters they were polling. So that if all of a sudden they showed Hillary up 10 points, it was because they got a much more Democratic skewed base of the independent polls. The other thing that's happening is I think the professional class is hardening its anti-Trump bias that was already present in 2016, but I think it's even more crystallized now. Like, one thing that was fascinating was I was curious the degree to which this discrepancy would occur, because it happened actually even in the late 60s. Most African Americans opposed the rioting, opposed the looting, opposed that you can get live interviews from people they were interviewing in Detroit where the media is surprised because local resident after local resident says, oh, these are outside agitator groups that wanted to come in and extend this. Then there's some local criminals who just wanted to use this as a pretext to steal stuff. This had nothing to do with any police issue, Those interviews, of course, disappear from the documentaries later done. Because they can't talk about, but like, you go into the polling for a long time now, African Americans have been mostly satisfied with the police force. So you have a group, African American men between the ages of 15 and 30, who have the most negative experiences with police, who will voice the most dissatisfaction. But outside of that, I mean, people forget, while there's a lot of fair criticism, and I was one of the critics at the time of the crime bill of 1994, that was entirely pushed by the African American community.
That's absolutely right. They were the biggest supporters. Absolutely. We forget.
Bill Clinton likes to, now and then he wants to defend himself, but then he knows he can't politically because of the circumstances. And he'll let the cat out of the bag occasionally, where he wants to say, it was the Black Congressional Congress that told me to pass that bill.
Right.
And it was because crack cocaine had ravaged communities, and the gang violence, nobody liked life under gang control, which is effectively what defund the police means. It either means what Tucker's talking about, which is they just want to replace it with a leftist police, a Stasi of their own accord, or it means the gangs have more control. Like, BLM is deeply in bed at various levels with the criminal underworld. And this goes back to Black Panther Party had the exact same problem. And in part because it wasn't rooted in the business community and the church community and the civil rights community in terms of lawyers and professionals, but also because who's the number one beneficiary if there's a Ferguson effect in your local town on police? The Ferguson effect being that cops stopped policing hardcore neighborhoods post-Ferguson for 2 years in major cities. It's going to be gangs. It's going to be the criminals. So like the Black Panther Party started as a self-defense mechanism to monitor police activity in Oakland. But right away, they had support from the criminal underworld because that deterred police aggressiveness. And they were the primary beneficiaries of that. Ultimately, the Black Panther Party ended up infiltrated heavily by gangs. Indeed, in LA, the Black Panther Party had always been just the renaming of gangs. People don't realize Crips were formed in 1969 after the Black Panther Party. In fact, LA, they formed they had a bunch of different gangs. They all formed their own 501c4 effectively. They were going to all relabel as, revolutionaries. You're like, this gig is perfect. This is perfect cover. And part of that was rooted in a legitimate history of black gangs in LA, which was they defended the local community against racist thugs who would come in and beat them up and try to keep them out of parks, keep them out of pools, keep them out of neighborhoods, etc. But by that time, late 60s, gangs were already primarily criminal in their activities.
They served a purpose in an early point, though, much like the Italian mob, to keep their own neighborhood safe. That tells us we're on a collision course, though, Robert, because I think probably it falls with what would replace these police departments. I think you find it falls somewhere in the middle. Like a Pelosi would love to have a Stasi, right?
Yes.
And she could see this as an opportunity. Great, we'll have our own police force. And then the activists that they're going to use to affect that change are not going to want that. And so, it goes back to the tiger. You can't,
exactly.
Right? Gets right back to the tiger. You cannot harness this kind of it's hate, ignorance, whatever. You can't harness ignorance and use it as a political tool forever. You can for a while. But
exactly. And they tried little samples of this in 2016. The other aspect is I think they really believe their own narrative that this will activate voters for the election.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
And there's no history of that. In 1968, turnout was not better than 1964 in urban Northern African American precincts.
Right.
And that was even with a scary figure like George Wallace on the ballot. If there was anybody that could get out urban black voters, it was a Alabama governor who just 4 years before had the embrace of the Klan and tried to stop the feds from integrating schools and colleges in Alabama. It still didn't get him out much. Also, I think people now will see in the rioting and looting where Wallace's appeal came from. They'll understand that. And that's partially what Trump's trying to more gently channel.
Yeah.
Wallace type, because he grew up then. He remembers that. Because Wallace was, he was famous for, I got a couple of four letter words for you folks. They're called SOAP and WORK.
Right.
He said, he said if anybody laid down in front of my time. Exactly. He said if anybody lays down in front of my car, it'll be the last car they lay down in front of. That kind of language. But Trump remembers that because Wallace got his strong surge in support from working in middle class ethnic neighborhoods in the North, the same ones Trump needs to win the Electoral College. So that people think he's playing either he's off his rocker to be attacking the old guy that got pushed down, or no, he's simply testing where he can go with the Wallace watered down George Wallace approach to these kind of issues.
Some of that 15%. Yep, where that went for Wallace. Yeah, nationally. Yeah,
exactly. A lot of guys who got laid off during this lockdown. That a fair portion are coming back. And it's a big open question how many of those jobs are going to come back in time. And Trump's trying to create the mindset. It definitely helped him that May's numbers were better than expected. And particularly construction bouncing back, as he reported.
Yep, half of them.
Huge. The question is, will it stay true in energy and will it stay true in manufacturing? He's got a smart attack on Biden that Biden has, for him to right out of the gate be defining Biden as the pro-China, anti-jobs guy was very helpful. But I think for him to get that, it doesn't surprise me that he took a hit in the polls because right now is when people are feeling the effects of the lockdown without seeing really the benefits of the lockdown because maybe those benefits never really accrued to them. So Trump was going to, take a hit early summer just from that. I don't think I think you're right that people are not giving full honest answers on the riot and looting. Just because we've seen that politically and people vote their own survival interest.
That's right.
So that their net response is, and not only that, there will be a backlash. Like my big annoyance with BLM, aside from not promoting legitimate cases or being a legitimate civil rights organization, is they make all the civil rights cases harder. Everybody pursuing some justice or remedy or correction in the legal system that was a victim of civil rights abuse will now face juries. I've already seen it in Wisconsin.
Skeptical. Yeah.
I had a case that was an extraordinary case. Extraordinary. I mean, they basically treated a guy like a garbage bag. And the jury, I was intrigued because there are members of the jury who knew me or knew of my reputation, who liked me personally. And when we had tested the case with focus groups and other groups and polling, it was off the charts, the support for our case. But the jury, I could tell the jury was hostile. So we settled the case before the jury could make a verdict. And it was fortunate and settled it on very, very good terms. But it was fortunate because the city just didn't read the jury correctly. And when the jury talked to the judge and later talked to us, it was going to be a 12-0 verdict against us.
Wow.
Which is mind-numbing. And the reason was, when I started talking, I had sensed this. But they have got to the point where they believe that even video is faked. Because they saw Trayvon Martin faked, because they saw Michael Brown faked, saw Tamir Rice faked, saw that sequence of, Tamir Rice wasn't a little 8-year-old playing with a little plastic orange gun in the bar.
Yeah.
He was showing something that appeared to be a real gun, was intimidating people all day long with it out on the streets. That's why people called the 911 about him. And when the police pull up, he goes to pull his gun, they believe is a gun. And you can tell the cop's reaction is not some abusive reaction because he's falling backwards when he's shooting. He's terrified.
He's scared.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's scared.
And he's scared because that's the reality in that community. And in places like North Cleveland, like South Side of Chicago, there has been a lot of gun violence in the African-American community where your typical person perpetrating, as well as you're often your victim, is a young African-American male between the ages of 15 and 30. And so if you come up as a cop in that reality, that's your great risk given the 911 call and the behavior of the individual. And also Tamir Rice would know this. Rice loved being able to feel powerful that day, and that's what he was doing. And so I understand that the kid who feels powerless, he grew up in a society where that was his life.
Right.
But he wasn't an 8-year-old playing with an orange plastic gun that a mean cop went up and shot in the head for giggles. But what happens is all the civil rights cases become harder. And so I've already seen a sneak
They make
peek
it difficult
of what a small backlash would be. And that was a Wisconsin, Milwaukee jury poll. So it's another classic Trump swing voter group. If they were already that mad and that distrustful that they wanted to express their rage at what they considered fake stories, and many of these included independents. Most of the jury were not Republicans. The Republicans, frankly, you can't use as a jury in a civil rights case now because they've become deeply distrustful of what's happening. But the fact that it had spread, that if you didn't have personal experience with the criminal justice system, you were going to rule against the civil rights plaintiff in almost every case, no matter how good the facts are compelling. And if that was true then, imagine what's coming. And aside from the legal side of the equation, that tells me it's going to show up in the ballot box, and it'll be even more of a secret Trump voter.
That's a shame, Robert.
Yes, it is.
I mean, if you're a Trump supporter, that's good on the political side.
Yeah, good for Trump, but not good for the civil rights reform in America. But again, that's BLM's goal. Yeah. They can't maintain power and have a divisive appeal if civil rights get solved.
Yeah,
it kills their issue. So it's the same reason why the Democratic Party can't ever actually deliver for the African-American community.
Never.
Because the moment they do, they have no political basis to appeal to them. Once they're just like Irish immigrants in 1960, they split their vote Republican. So they're terrified of that happening. Because without 85% plus African-American support, the Democratic Party loses its congressional base. It loses its senatorial base, loses its gubernatorial base, state legislative base. Almost all of that disappears because there's not enough white liberals to get them elected to almost any place outside of like Massachusetts.
Right.
So that dynamic means they've got to keep them a dependent victim. They need them to stay in a permanent victim mentality. That's the other thing where BLM is just the opposite of King and X. Both King and X, even though on opposite sides to a certain degree of tactical approaches to civil rights, and X was not bashful about saying he thought people were racist. But if you can turn that around, you look at BLM, but both of them believed in self-empowerment. They preached empowerment to local community, empowerment. I mean, the Nation of Islam, one of its great appeals was it had young men and wearing all the right suits, behaving the right way, acting in the same manner. I mean, their lack of appeal was the ban of pork. That probably was a bad idea tactically, but it was a religious condition. But I was an older African-American friend of mine who has the greatest name in the world. His name is Moses Freeman.
That is a great name.
But he told me a long time, old school Southern politician, Chattanooga, Democratic side of the aisle. He prays for me because I'm on the Trump side of the aisle. He has other people praying for me too.
Those are great people, though.
Oh, fantastic. Old
They're
school
great.
guy, very knowledgeable. But he's the kind of guy who's nowhere near the organizational structure at BLM. But he told me a long time ago, Nation of Islam, he's like, ban on pork. They're never going to get past 2% of the local community. But they were still rooted in self-empowerment. And X had big sermons about that. Same with Dr. King. These folks don't want that, and nor does the Democratic Party want that, because their goal is not real improvement of the African American community. Their goal is to leverage the African American community's discontent into political power for themselves.
Yeah, they were both also very skeptical of the white liberal.
Oh,
People I think would be shocked to read some of the stuff.
Malcolm X said that they're like the fox. He's a wolf you can see coming. The fox pretends to be your friend before he devours the chicken egg.
That's it.
King was less blunt publicly, but had similar private commentary. Also, neither organization was very effectively. There were a few communist lawyer types that hung around Dr. King, but Marxists had no ability to infiltrate them very easily. Nor were criminals able to infiltrate them very easily.
Nor religiosity aspect, you think?
Everybody knew everybody. So like Black Panthers, they invited anybody in. They had no idea who their local community was. So it was easy for informers. So the head of security for Fred Hampton in Chicago, who got assassinated by Chicago police, he was an informer the entire time. So now they got an informant close to X. X's head of security was an informant, but they only had one or two informants inside X's group. As a whole, they had difficulty. That's why they had to go to Newark to have someone to kill him. They weren't able to infiltrate it that nowhere near like they did the Black Panthers, where they're informants everywhere.
They were in there. Yeah.
And they had criminals everywhere. And then they also had Marxists everywhere. It was a very easy organization for Marxists to infiltrate. That's why the Black Panther Party starts out in 1967 as simply a self-defense local organizing party wanting to exercise their Second Amendment rights. And they stage a big political PR event by accident at the state capitol, where they go with guns because Ronnie Reagan, God bless his soul, decided to take away people's gun rights in California at the time. People forget.
They do.
That's where he was with it, because they were scared of the black man with a gun, which was origin of a lot of gun control goes back to. And so they showed up with their guns, and then the media member, probably deliberately, but misdirected them from the spectator. Rather than give them directions to the spectator chamber, sent them onto the floor. So you can imagine all these old white liberal California folks who pretend to be liberal, but it was a Sidney Poitier era of who's coming to dinner. All of a sudden, they turn around and they see 10 black guys in leather coats, berets, and machine guns standing right behind them while they're voting on whether or not they have the right to keep and bear arms. But within 2 years, it became an open Marxist platform for the large part. And that's because Marxists could infiltrate it easily and gave it its intellectual infrastructure. Whereas Dr. King and Malcolm X already had their intellectual infrastructure, already had their individual infrastructure, and Marxists weren't going to spend a year trying to infiltrate the Nation of Islam. They weren't going to spend 2 years trying to infiltrate. Even if they did infiltrate the local church, they're still low on the hierarchy. And then everybody knows them. That was the other reason why the protests were so clean. Like if you went and acted up, your grandma was going to be
identified. And you're right. Somebody's mom will come and whoop you.
Exactly. Right. And that's why it was a no-go. I mean, that's how because you talk about making it difficult. They had great. There are so many people who are trying to undermine those civil rights protests by making them look violent. It's what BLM has done. What BLM has done is, hey, it's told particularly the white community, but everybody in general, if we don't keep our knee on the neck of the criminal class in your local city, here's what they're going to do to your local city.
Right.
And this is why I say it's intended to be stereotypical, because it wants, for their view, is mounting divisiveness. It's the old communist 1920 strategy. Trigger a reaction that will then trigger another reaction. That will then trigger another reaction. They're not looking at solutions. They're solely looking at how can we tear the whole system down.
And it's, Robert, you got to admit it's working though, right? I mean, the average American halfway represented by the Republican Party, right? Because this is like the first revolution that is not from the bottom, right? I mean, we are in the middle of an attempted revolution. I mean, this is an attempt to overthrow of the system.
And they really believe it will work. That's what I try to explain to people. It's like the reason why they're going to keep doing this and accelerating it and escalating it is they think the world changes overnight.
Yeah.
And they're partially right. America generally has not fit into that category. But world history, global history, over time, the world often has changed overnight. And so they think they're right on the cusp of their ideas becoming the ideas and locking up all the Trump supporters because they were fascist.
Right.
I mean, that's Antifa's objective. I mean, they have convinced themselves of this objective. I mean, it was a communist tactic back in the 1920s. They started out as just communists. Then the fascists were really a response to the communists. Hitler got his first marching orders in response to communist uprisings in Germany. That was the beginning of his political power, the beginning of the Nazis to a certain degree in terms of their institutional influence. And but the communists recognized, hey, you know what? We'll just call ourselves anti-fascists. Well, we'll no longer be called ourselves communists. We'll just call ourselves anti-fascists because that way we can get a whole bunch of other people on our side temporarily. And of course, when we seize power, we're going to be sending all of them to the gulag.
Anyway,
just I mean, I ask all the it's like they make the same mistake over and over again. You would think after Trotsky, yeah, exactly, him getting murdered, everybody connected to him getting murdered. He had that famous chart of all the people who formed the original Soviet committee. And like 34 to 37 Stalin guy had killed within 10 years of seizing power. You would think they would learn their lesson, but you look at Cuba, all the liberals were on board with Fidel, and then they're shocked that all of a sudden they're all getting arrested. And
I tell my liberal friends that in media all the time, Robert. I don't know what you're doing. You're the first one to be lined up against the wall. You are the first one.
Absolutely.
I hate to tell you, but you're not going to make this, okay?
If they could have, they would have
lined you up.
Exactly. If they could have, they would have shot the Minneapolis mayor that day.
It's
just they don't feel they have the political green light to be there. But here you have a guy on his knees, groveling, telling and because he won't go as far as they want him to go, he's completely banished.
Yep.
That's the nature of that system. It devours its own.
De Blasio's own daughter was arrested. He's not good enough. He wants to, to at least take away some of the funding. He agreed to that. It's never enough. It's never enough. And Republicans do well to learn that, Robert. They do.
Absolutely. I mean, seeing Mitt Romney, like there's an irony. His dad made the same mistake. Kevin Phillips wrote about it in the Emerging Republican Majority. Well, he called them the liberal Republicans.
Yeah.
So Governor Romney, then of Michigan, Rockefeller in New York, other people like it. He said they're all trying to appease the new agitated groups. And he said all that's going to do is cost them votes. It's never going to gain them political support.
Nope.
And that's exactly, I mean, by 1973, 74, they're almost all wiped out of the Republican Party. Lindsay, New York City, et cetera. The other thing people forget, a lot of friends are saying, well, cities looking at economics and real estate in terms of urban environments. They say, cities have always bounced back historically. People forget in the United States, the last time we had anything like this, we had 20 years of cities being hellholes.
Yep.
Trump would have his own word probably for it.
He would. I try to tell people that as somebody from family still there from New York City, part of the Italian exodus out of New York to Jersey. People don't remember this, Robert. It's like, and a nation
forgot all their history.
They have.
The whole image, like we went from the peak of liberal power was really 1964, massive congressional sweep, huge majorities, dominant, but they had been on basically a 32-year run of dominance where your most conservative politician elected was Eisenhower. Yeah. And Eisenhower was didn't come from the conservative wing of the Republican Party. In fact, he defeated them to get the nomination.
Yep.
And then within 2 years, we would be on a path that only a guy like Kevin Phillips would predict, and he predicted it back in 1967 when he was working for the Nixon campaign, and then wrote the book afterwards. I tell everybody, the emerging Republican majority.
That's right. They got to read that.
It's a Bible, because you might think it's just about 1968, but he goes all the way back through the entire American political history. And he helps explain why this little town, both of these two little towns in the same county in the same state are Germans, but they're against each other because one comes from the Lutheran Protestant tradition and the other one comes from the Catholic. It was fascinating little stuff. But he was predicting all of this back then. But it's amazing how much it happened. The reason why nobody in the media and the academy could believe him was because there had been, for all of their lifetimes, Democratic liberal control, and they had all just reached the apex of that. And the idea that after 1968, the most quote-unquote liberal president until Obama would be Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton, who by 1960s metrics didn't meet up to the liberal standard of what was in LBJ's policy administration. Yep. And that's because a large part of it was in response to the crazy culture war that the young millennial professional class left of its time, then boomers, created, and the rioting and the looting. And the effect of it was just a massive backlash. So that by 1970 and by the 70s, we have Dirty Harry, we have Charlie Bronson vengeance movies, Death Wish. These became cultural phenomenons because of a cultural backlash.
Vigilantism.
Vigilantism was popular, was cool, was hip.
It was, yeah.
All of that. And so that if history repeats itself, that's what we're heading to now, even though the polls don't seem to show it. Now you have the big X factor of the unusual lockdown and whether or not Trump can at least create the perception, if not the reality in the short term, of that the economy is going to be back. I think the big advantage is he's still going up against Joe Biden. So
he can defeat himself. And I'd note, because I try to, especially toward the end of the show, I try to answer questions. Somebody asked about the Gallup poll before. He's down at 39 or 38, his new low. I would note to people what Robert and I were just talking about before. Go look who answered it. If it's not R+1 or roughly even, then it's response bias. And now we just see more people who are less favorable to Trump deciding not to participate in the survey because bad things are going on. That's number one. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but that's what I would tell people to do off the top of my head. And then two, Robert, they lag. Gallup lags. Oh, yes. There's no jobs report in there. It's at the height of bad news and rioting and civil unrest. Gallup's at least a week behind.
Exactly. And I think given the cultural conformity, like the difference between now and the late 1960s is there wasn't the degree of cultural hegemonic influence of the left. So I think people would have been more honest with polling back then than I think they're going to be now. But there's going to be a lot of people that are nursing pure. I've already seen the preview in live time 2 years ago in the Milwaukee trial. And this is that on steroids. I think a real backlash is coming, but they're not going to tell the pollsters about it until Election Day.
That's why people have asked us, are you going to do public polling? I've had two outlets approach us, and I told them I don't want to do national polling. So if you're looking for somebody to hire to do a regular national poll to compete with everybody else, go find someone else. What I will do is maybe 30, 40, even 50% will be repeat panelists, and we'll take the Rust Belt. We'll take regions of the electoral map. This way we know, the national vote is probably indicative of nothing. Until the census comes out, we should be very skeptical of its ability to be a leading indicator for battleground states. That's number one. And number two, I don't want to be subject to response bias. So those who are alternative that approach me, that's what I told them. Don't do that. Do something different. Be different and be bold, because you're not going to be able to compete with them anyway. You're just not. And they're going to report what we're talking about. that bias that's going to be in, and they're going to love it because it goes with what they're saying. They're going to want to do it, Robert. So you can't play fire with fire. They got more money, they have more hits, they got more views, they got more cable combined. You cannot do it. You got to do something different that really intrigues people, and then be open about it, more open than CNN or Fox or any of them are going to be. Here's where we got the responses. This is who answered it. This is where he is. Not just the, your typical crosstab crap. Be as transparent as possible. Make the other outlets suspect. That's what you got to do. And that's it. Thoughts before we get out of here. And I got to tell you, thanks for the hour. I mean, you gave us an hour. I was going to try to get 25, 30 minutes with you. This is great.
No problem. I think one of the giveaways is a Monmouth poll, which talked about whether the media's narrative that this was mostly peaceful protest worked. Yeah. And what was fascinating is, not a surprise that conservatives and Republicans and Trump supporters didn't buy it. But what was most interesting was the cross-class coalition that also did not buy it. Working class Latinos did not buy it. Working class African Americans did not buy it.
Right.
Indeed, only upper middle class white Democrats bought it. And then like Brian Stelter's out there pitching it again today. Oh, the riot lie. It was a big myth. All that does is continue their self-discrediting. And if that's a preview of things to come, when I get to London come October, my money's going to be on the El Donado to win again.
Yeah. All right, folks. That's Robert Barnes. Follow him on Twitter if you don't already, at Barnes _ right? _ law. At Barnes _ law. Check him out on Twitter. Great insight. Robert, thanks for joining us. Like I said, I was going to try to squeeze out a half hour with you. This was good stuff. It was real treat. I appreciate it. And come back soon, will you?
Will do.
All right. Take it easy.
Adios.
All right, folks. That was Robert Barnes. Again, follow him at Barnes _ law. Just a wealth of information on legal history, political history, and how it all ties in. And then Robert and I, we've known each other now for years. And with the polling, we've tried, to do different things. They don't want to evolve. They do not want to evolve. I mean, it's at this point, it's pretty clear. And it's, like I've said in the beginning of the show, I feel like sad to say this. I really do. I don't want to say it, but I really have no other explanation. At this point, a lot of this stuff has got to be on purpose, or at least that they would use the biases that are inherent in some of these methods and modes in their favor, and still be able to say, well, I save face because I did it the way it's been the gold standard for all of these years. And they're not going to tell you what we spent the last, first hour of the show telling you, or the second half of the first hour. And then what Robert and I just discussed on and off throughout that hour. So also too, it is Wednesday. We got kind of pushed back. So I want to just say this kind of as a show announcement. With Monday and Tuesday, we got pushed back. And I really I know a lot of you expressed interest in some of what we had talked about with the Northeast. And look, that was a preview to it. So we will start some of that. Usually I like to do series during the week, and keep it consistent. But I'm only going to focus on about 2 Northeastern states anyway. All right. And it really, what Robert was talking about before with the history of it, it will dovetail nicely. So we'll do that this week, Thursday and Friday. We'll touch on that, about the opportunity of the Republican Party that they are squandering, and the Democrats are not squandering. They're very good at this. They see opportunities in states like Nevada, which used to be a red state. They see opportunities like in states like Arizona, which is now a purple state, and Joe Biden is leading in, according to most polls. Which you saw the voter analysis. Take that at face value. He would have to, beat Donald Trump in Maricopa County. That's the bottom line. But yeah, so we'll talk about how they've done a good job. Republicans have not, and like they have with elements of the Black community that were absolutely reachable, they have squandered those opportunities. And in the game of politics, if you are on the defensive, you are losing. They are constantly reacting to everything that's going on right now. They've been reactionary, trying to placate, trying to appease. If you are on the defense, you are losing. If you are explaining yourself, you are losing. If you are not being proactive and searching for new constituencies, you are wrong. That is not how this game is played, and it sure as hell isn't how it is won. All right, we're a couple of minutes over here, folks. Don't forget to like the page, People's Pundit Daily on Facebook. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube before you go. And also, of course, the best way to support the show is, of course, to subscribe to the best data journalism website on the internet. And you can do that by going to peoplespunditdaily.com, choosing one of the digital subscriptions, take the short link, ppdnews.us/subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. We will see you back here tomorrow, Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Another thank you to our special guest, Robert Barnes. All the best, folks. See you tomorrow morning.
How much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker, you're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. Rhythm in our love, it's impressive, excessive. You can't make this stuff up. My chest beats, it's restless, wakes the neighbors up above. Yeah, baby, come and show me love. Baby, come and show me love, because you're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
We can get on a plane and take a one-way ride, steal us away to find a place we can hide. It wouldn't take much to spear for a night, to give in to the need and leave it all behind.
'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. 'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow